All right, I'd like to say hello to everybody. We come back with another installment of Recovery from Addiction. Tonight's episode is going to be it's entitled Obstacles to Recovery. You know, it would seem like uh, everybody from somebody's just trying to get into recovery to even old timers. There's what's called obstacles to recovery. Uh, in my point of view, is it's where a process has taken place, which I'm terming the obstacle that will prevent or either give a person a struggle into getting into the next phase of the recovery process. And the number one phase that people have to get into is to stop using of whatever symptom that they're using. Now, remember, I talked about a while back that there's addiction slash alcoholism, where the addiction or the alcoholism is the disease, and it's made up of obsessive and compulsive thinking and behavior. Obsessive compulsive thinking and behavior. And the symptom of the disease is the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the gambling, the shopping, the eating, whatever it is that that particular individual has. It can also be a combination of everything I just mentioned and some stuff and some more. So, moving on and talking about obstacles to recovery, what are the components of the obstacle? And the obstacles are a lot of times it could be physical. It could be a person can be within a neighborhood or within an environment where the using is going on, and they're having problems. And so that environment can influence behavior. But also, I'm talk about some other stuff. I want to talk about first, like that can go on with the individual. And the first thing I'm gonna talk about is denial. One of the main obstacles of anybody in recovery, whether somebody's new or somebody that's in recovery, one thing that will always be present in anybody's recovery is denial. People will deny that they have a problem. Oh, yes, they will. Or, in this denial, it could be either subtle, whereas it said, well, I'm not bad as Jane Doe across the street, or I can handle it. Or it could be just outright, I don't have a problem. Even though in most areas of recovery, they'll say the proof is in how you living, how you taking care of your business. So that being said, denial. And denial is complex. It's very complex. It's not just a person will just flat out deny something. The hurdle with denial is it's protected by justification, rationalization, outright deceitfulness, and lying. And it's not only to the individual, but it's to those around them. So really, denial is self-deceptive. And that's what makes it so challenging. The person or people, and it could be a collective, like I said in a previous video, when I talked about the collective addiction. And inside the collective, man, people, they can, you can have a whole group of people up under the same obsessive and compulsive behavior. And they could be in denial about it through rationalization. Well, there's a reason why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because of that right there. And self-righteousness is what I'm describing. But it could be on the collective, basis. But let's get back to the individual. You know, an individual, they could be self-righteous or justifying their using. They could say, well, because look what you doing. you know, and don't be somebody that's indulging in the same thing they're doing, or you used to do it, because they bring out you used to do it. So the focus in the process of denial, it would not always be on that individual. The only way that I know of that a person will come out of denial and stay out of denial is that they've hit what is called a bottom in some areas. They have hit a bottom where they've had an experience where they themselves would tell you, I don't want that no more. And the bottom, the extent of the bottom is that they could have lost everything and going to jail, ended up in a hospital on their deathbed. That's how extreme it could be. But it can also be very, very mild. You can have a very mild bottom. Somebody could have I almost had a car accident and said I was up under the influence of that marijuana. I ain't smoking that no more, and leave it alone. But that's only dealing with the symptom. So, and that's what we're talking about. How to put that symptom down. Let's look at justification, and which I hit on a little bit earlier. Justification of why I'm doing what I'm doing. It could be anywhere from experience, having a traumatic experience, and they'll tell you, my father died. I got abandoned as a kid, or I was raped and molested. So these are all justifications, and in their mind, and in the mind of the individual that's doing all this or using, it's for real with them, and nothing you could say or do could change their mind, especially if it's firmly justified. Deceitfulness. Let's talk about deceitfulness. And deceitfulness and lying is the same thing, basically. But deceitfulness, in my view, is a little complex, where lying is just a little bit more direct. So, in looking at the denial, in order for the person to come out of denial, and don't think you're going to talk them out of it, you're going to pray them out of it, you're going to punish them out of it, you're going to do anything to get this individual out. Anything from the outside on the outside of them will never, in most cases, have them change their mind. And they can go up before a judge and be looking at time. And they might resign. And when I say resign, they might say, so let's say a person goes up before the judge, and the judge say, okay, while under the influence of alcohol, you hit this person, you looking at 15 years. But I tell you what I'm gonna do. Since you're a first-time offender, I'm gonna put you in this program, and you're gonna be able to do this and this and this, and you don't do all the 15, you might do it a year. And you say, okay, I'll do that. You just resigned yourself. It wasn't nothing that was wholehearted. You just resigned to the fact that I don't want to do this time right here or do as much time. So it's a resignation. Total surrender is when the individual experience what some people call an ass whooping, or they have an experience that was so revealing to them mentally, physically, and emotionally, they are bankrupt to physically, they're not touching anything anymore. And what that leads to is acceptance. Admittance. So a person to make that admit, yeah, these drugs is killing me. This alcohol is killing me. This sex, this porno, this whatever it is, ruining my life. They say like, I don't care if I do the time. I ain't doing that no more. I don't care if I lose all my friends. I'm not doing that anymore. This is what this is about. So they make an admittance. And however, the admittance is painful because what happens in most cases, the individual see that they've been up under the powers, they've been up under the influence of a power, what? Greater than themselves. Yeah. And it ain't got nothing to do, with no God. It's got something to do with something they was worshiping. Yeah. So moving on, when they make this painful admittance, there's a void. And it's like, what should I do? So let me back up here. Let me back up. During the admittance phase, a person can go back and forth from admittance to denial. They can come out of denial and say, okay, yeah, I got this problem with this drugs, with this sex, with this gambling, with this alcohol, with this promiscuous behavior. They say, yeah, I got that. And then you will hear everything I just mentioned. You might still hear some justification. You might still hear some rationalization. But once they move into the admittance phase of this obstacle that I'm talking about, then you know, and I'm talking about this is outright forthright. They forthright say, okay, yeah, I do have a problem. They may go back and forth, but at some point you'll know is when they, of their own free will in the court, they say, yeah, I do have a problem with this. Then a void is created. And the void is what should I do? Now let me back up. So when they accept what they doing is wrong, and they'll tell you, they'll say, I got to do something else. What can I do? You know, and sure, some people might come up with a couple of suggestions or what have you, but the bottom line is the person that says, well, what should I do? Or I'm just gonna stop. So they have accepted the fact that there's something going on when they get to the point where they're at the what can I do phase or what should I do phase. So moving on. And they will go back and forth from acceptance to admittance. Because now they really begin to see that they are really having some problems. So moving on from acceptance to surrender. At the acceptance phase, that's when when they're looking at options on the table or seeking some options, whether it's a treatment center, whether it's a church, or whatever it is that they feel they need. Because understand this, they know what they need. Now, they might need to hear some things, but the individual or the collective, they know what they need to stop, because there's another decision that has to be made. So when I talked about the stopping phase, I have another word for it. When they surrender, when they give up. And this is what surrender means. The only thing surrender means is that the person is not rationalizing, they ain't justifying, they ain't lying, they ain't doing None of that. None of those mental masturbations to keep them, to rationalize what they're doing, their behavior. So, man, it's like, okay, what can I do? So they stop fighting and they stop looking at they stop looking at options or seeking options. And that's in the surrender phase. And they might come up with an option. And like I said, usually, in most cases that I've come across and seen, is options that's good for them. Because a person might say, well, maybe you might need to go to church. And they say, well, nah, I ain't really good with that. Maybe I just need some outpatient. All right, they came up with their own solution, and that's what they need to do. All right, can I help you find a place? Or they might say I need some inpatient, or they might say I need a psychiatrist or some type of counselor. They have actually started coming up with their own path to recovery, their own solutions. So let's talk about codependency for a second. And I'm just going to throw some codependency in there. What happens in codependency is there is a loved one or somebody close to that person. They want to help them out so bad that they go find a place. They go find they gonna pay for them to go. They gonna do all that. That's what the codependent person does. And they might have their own reasons. They could be out of the goodness of their heart. It could be shame. It could be guilt. It could be anything. But the bottom line is that person needs to find their own solutions to their own problems, because it's not over with yet. Believe me, it ain't over with yet. It's not over. It's not over by a long shot. If we get to this phase right here, if we get to the surrender phase, we got to get that person into the recovery phase. And understand this, that person could stop using at this point. They could stop at the surrender phase. They say, I'm not doing that no more. I'm through. That don't put them in recovery. That put them in stop. That's the foundation for a recovery. Yeah, it's a foundation, because the addiction is still present. Guess what? The symptom has ceased, but the addiction is still present. The obsessive and the compulsive behavior is still present. And at this time, I want to say what some people will do. They will put that symptom down, or those set of symptoms down, and go get something else to make them feel good. So, that being said, and they'll say, check this out, because remember, rationalization and justification really ain't went nowhere. It's going to pop up in a whole nother, it's disguised itself or morphosizes itself. So that being said, they'll say, well, I ain't drinking and I ain't smoking meth or crack, but this marijuana is all right. I've seen it hundreds of times. They'll say this marijuana is all right. Or they'll start eating. They'll start eating. And they'll tell you, at least I ain't doing that. So the obsessive and compulsive have been there. I mean, it's still there. And some people in the field call it what? Transference of addictions. But it's really transference of a symptom, because the addiction is still there. Remember, addiction is obsessive and compulsive thinking and behavior. Obsessive thinking and compulsive behavior. Very simple. I mean, you can go look it up and you're going to hear all these, you're going to hear some definitions. But at the end of the day, it's obsessive thinking, something that you study thinking about, you can't get it up out your mind, out of the mind. And the obsession is like, fuck, I'll do anything. Almost. But some of us don't do anything because we done it right. So moving on with this recovery from addiction. I mean, the title of the show is Recovery and Addiction, and today's topic is Obstacles to Recovery. So moving on. At the recovery phase, when a person makes a decision, now remember, like I said, person, they can stop the symptom for days, months, and even years. I've seen it. But the recovery phase, that has to be another decision. Like I said, another decision has to be made. And I'm talking about recovery. And so recovery is basically defined as an active change in our thinking and our behavior. Our thinking and our behavior. In most circles, that's what recovery is. And you're going to hear some definitions like, and I'm not going to negate, restoration to what you used to be. Excuse me. Restoration to restore from a previous state. I heard that one before. To be restored from a previous state. But in order to be restored to a previous state, as far as addiction is concerned, it must be an active change in your thinking and in your behavior. And understand that there must be a tool for that. There has to be a tool, because understand this, the average person that has come to the recovery process has tried before. And they may have tried several recovery methods like church, like religion, like different philosophies. They may have tried. And they quote unquote relapse. And we'll talk about that one later. We're going to talk about relapse before I get up out of here. So that being said, we're going to move on to recovery. So the person, let's say, so they make the decision that they're going to recover. They say, well, look, okay, let me back up a little bit. So what happens in the person's using, most addicts, they develop certain skills. And I talked about a few already. I talked about they learn how to lie, to be deceitful. They're very rational people. They can rationalize murder, taking of a life, and justify it. You know, addicts or people that suffer from addiction, they are so stealth. They are so stealth that they outslick themselves. They can't see themselves. And that's for real. Only way they see themselves, they come out of that stealth mode, is they slam on that bottle. Is that bottle get them? Mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And it has to be done in all four areas. If one area, usually when a person hit a bottom and they hit mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, what happens, and I want to make sure I'm saying it right, is mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. If any of them areas are left untouched, believe me, relapse is right down the road, or they're going to come out the recovery process, out the recovery process, because getting clean is a part of the recovery process, getting clean and sober. And they're going to come up out of there eventually. If not sooner, it's going to be later. Usually people that experience long-term recovery, and I'm going to say long-term recovery, I'm going to put it at 10 years. I'm going to put the bar at 10 years or more. And I have a reason for that. Usually when a person used after 10 years, that means that's how much time it took for that reservation to come out. And what the reservation is what they was holding on to that we didn't see. Maybe some of us seen it as a group. But that individual had that reservation so well. And a reservation is exactly what it meant. They said, for example, I don't know what I'm going to do if my mama die. I don't know what I'm going to do if my kids die. I don't know what I'm going to do if my significant other leave me. These are reservations. When they start talking that I don't know what I'm going to do shit. On the real tip. So, backing up and talking about making the choice to recover. Or to recover. They must make that choice. They have to make that choice. If not, it's going to be some reservation. It's room for reservation. You know, they might stay clean for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but usually at the 10-year mark, most people fall off. They will go use something, or they'll end up in jail, or they'll kill themselves, or they end up in some type of an institution. Why? Because the reality of living, now understand this, and this is my personal opinion. Most addicts or people that's addicted today, when you take away their symptom, there's a challenge to living a quote unquote normal life without that symptom or symptoms that they have. And it'll have a mental effect on them. Paranoia. They after me. The inability to adapt to social settings. Yeah. We see it all the time. The inability to adapt to social settings. And it'll be masked in certain isms, you know, or certain beliefs. So anyway, moving on with the obstacles. Even with old timers, and you know, I talked about 10 years because at 10 years, you basically are old timer. What happens with old timers is, from what I've seen, and I'm an old timer, you know, like I said, I've been around I've been in recovery for 35 years and 11 months and some change as of today. As of 12/13/2021. Yeah. So I've had a chance to see and also to witness my own behavior in recovery. You know. So moving on. And what happens with the old timers is they can revert back to certain thinking and behaviors. A lot of times they won't assume responsibility for their behavior. And I'm going to say, and I'm going to put this out. They start blaming everything on God. God for their recovery, God for them not using, God for whatever. And a lot of times, man, it's what I believe, individuals need to take responsibility for their own recovery. A lot of times in some of the fellowships, or you'll hear, or in religious organizations, where recovery is, where they have recovery programs, they'll have the God piece, and everything gets put on God, and the individual has next to nothing. I thank God that I'm clean today. Only thing I thank God for is that there's a day. And the decisions that I have to make is my own decisions. And what happens is, when I don't assume responsibility and I put it off on something or somebody else, then that's the benefit I'm going to get from that. That's all I'm going to say about that. Because I don't, for right now, I'll just say that. So taking personal responsibility for my own recovery, for my own decision, and let me say this, for my own decision to recovery, because recovery is not a decision, it's an option. And while I'm talking about options, people say, well, using is not an option. As long as it's some dope and some alcohol and some food and some sex, as long as there's something to choose from A to B, there's an option there. It ain't an option for me. Yeah, all right. But if it was an option for somebody else, it's damn sure an option for me. So in talking about obstacles to recovery, these are some of the obstacles that has to be overcome to get to the decision to recovery, because recovery, to make an active change in one's thinking and behavior, is a choice. It's not, it is optional. And I understand, some people had some bottoms or they had they used, they became homeless and penniless and lost their job and all that. But some people didn't. Some people didn't. I understand that one of the greatest obstacles to recovery is my thinking if it's not progressive. Why? Because the disease of addiction and alcoholism is progressive. And as long as I'm not progressive in my recovery, then I'm in the process of relapse, because relapse is a process, it's not an event. It don't just happen. A person don't just wake up and say, hey, I'm about to get high today. Nah. Relapse starts long before the individual, long before that individual pick up whatever it is they pick up. So I want to talk about another obstacle to recovery. It's called the runners. And it can happen with newer members, newer people in recovery, as well as old timers. A person will get to a point where there's something that they don't want to face, and it usually involves resentment and anger, and it brings on the fear. And they say, I am not facing that. And they will hit a wall in recovery. One of these. One of those. They'll hit that wall so hard, and they'll try to go over it, around it, or they'll just retreat the other way. And you hear things like, well, let's say if it's a person that's involved in a recovery group. And they'll say, hey, well, I'll grew that group over there. I'll grew them people over there. Or they ain't talking about what I'm talking about. And they'll go the other way. Now, I'm not saying that's 100%, but it's about 90%. Because a lot of times, man, in groups, remember when I talked about groups being addicted? You can go to certain groups and they'll talk about, and their topics will have nothing to do with recovery. Or or it'll be what's the word that I'm trying to say? It could be it won't be deep. It could be just mild recovery, surface. Talking that surface recovery. And how do you know? All you hearing the slogans, somebody sharing whatever somebody else sharing. Yeah. So it's surface. It has nothing to do with the in-depthness of recovery. Yeah, and I stand on that one. See it all the time. It's happening right now. You can go to a Zoom meeting. You can go to a person, a meeting in person. The only thing you will very seldom hear what? Experience, strengths, and hopes. You will hear a lot of hopes, but people ain't gonna talk about too much experience. Why? Because it can bring up some feelings and emotions that a person may not be wanting to deal with. Or you'll hear people, well, I'm gonna meet with my sponsor. I'm talking about my spine. I'm not gonna share this in the group. So a lot of times in recovery, and I will be the first not to say that I'm the one that can't judge who's in and out of recovery because I don't know what the person is recovering from. But however, what I can say is I know recovery when I hear it based on, or I can say about just about what phase an individual is in their recovery. Why? Because I'm identifying with you. If you've been around here for 10 years, for a decade, and I ain't saying exactly a decade, but if you've been in recovery a decade, you know bullshit when you hear it. No bullshit when you hear it. Another obstacle to recovery, sponsorship. Let me say it again. Sponsorship. Sponsorship can be an obstacle to recovery because a lot of times you can have somebody that's a sponsor. That's a sponsor. And they got 10, 11, 12 sponsees. Sound like ego to me. And then the flip side of sponsorship is this. You can have a sponsee that's got a sponsor in name just to say that they're either associated with that person or that they have a sponsor. That's how sponsorship can be an obstacle to recovery. Understand this. Addicts are very creative people. Very creative. Innovative. And in most cases, they know what to do in a certain situation to give the appearance, that's deceitfulness, right? To give the appearance that they're involved in the recovery process when they're only faking it. That's all they doing, man. So recovery can be an obstacle to, sponsorship can be an obstacle to recovery. Ready for the next one? Home group or groupings. Home group. Let me back up for a minute and get back on the sponsorship thing. So there's a trend out there called sponsorship families. There's the sponsor, then he got his sponsees, brothers and sisters and so forth. And that family could range from, I seen them range to 50 or more addicts calling themselves a sponsorship family. And one phase, and one part that's good because there's a network that has been formed. But the flip side of that is this. That could easily be transformed into a clique. With the sponsor at the top. Right. With the sponsor at the top. And that will be an obstacle to recovery, because if a person joins as a person to sponsor them, and he or she has 10, 15 sponsees, then what else, what else? And this person may not want to be a part of all that, but in order to get what they think they might need, then they go to this individual over here, to this group. Sponsorship groups, man. And don't tell me it exists. They really do. They really do. So sponsorship can be an obstacle to recovery if you dealing in a recovery modality that has sponsorship, and most people do, because effective recovery, is a group thing, not an individual thing, unless you got you a counselor or a therapist. And then, so let's talk about counselors and therapists as far as recovery. Understand that a sponsor and a therapist, in most cases, they are educated. In most cases, they're educated, and so it's going to be certain, what word am I looking for? It's going to be certain, okay, they're ethically bound. Put it to you like that. Therapists, psychiatrists, and what's that other one? Psychiatrists and I'll think of it in a minute. So they're ethically bound, and so it's certain things that they won't be able to touch in recovery. Now we have a new thing out called recovery coaching. Recovery coaching. They are least ethically bound than the psychiatrist or the counselor. They have more wiggle room. A counselor and a psychologist. That's what I'm trying to think of. And a counselor, a psychologist, a therapist. They have very stringent rules of engagement. Yeah, code of ethics. So moving on. So now I want to talk about groups. Because you got different recovery groups out there. And some of them are termed home groups. They're termed home groups. And inside the home group process, what it is, we have to be sure that you're not getting into another clique. Because in home groups, you have personalities. There will be personalities in damn near any home group you go to, and I don't care what method of recovery you in, whether you're in 12-step AA, 12-step NA, agnostic, atheist, LGBT. They all got one thing in common: personalities. There's that personality that somebody gonna look up to and think in their mind that that's the example or the model of the recovering addict. And I'm going to say what? In 90%, in 95%, I'm going to go out on a limb. And 95% of what I'm saying is true about that. So the individual, see what happens is groups, whether it's a sponsorship family, whether it's a home group, will tend to affect the individual. Let me put it this way. They will tend to affect the individuality of the individual, affecting their personal recovery. Put cash money on it. I bet you're a fat man, fat girl, or a fat dog. So is it a hopeless situation? No, it's not a hopeless situation. Understanding that at some point the individual must understand that they're responsible for their personal recovery. And that if you, and this is my personal feeling, if you got the same person for a sponsor 5 years, that's your friend. That relationship is flipped. Or your business partner, I don't care what nobody say. And I would say in most cases, now is that good or bad that you had the sponsor for 5 or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? I don't know, that's up to you to get honest with. It's up to that individual. For me personally, I don't do it. I ain't never done it. Now, do I work with somebody? Yeah, I do. I keep it 100. I always got somebody. So let's move on with obstacles to recovery. We talked about, so far we talked about the individual coming out of denial, to admittance, to acceptance, to surrender, to making the decision to recovery. So coming from basically off of their, coming from their symptom, drugs, alcohol, food, sex, gambling, shopping, to getting clean, to admittance, to acceptance, and through the acceptance process, the person say, okay, I got this problem, therefore they can make they're in the position to make a decision about coming into the recovery process. The surrender is when we say, well, they're good, or they're serene, or the pressure of carrying all that previous stuff from previous garbage, you might say, has been lifted. Because now they say, okay, I see this, I'm not fighting with my situation anymore. What do I need to do now? And that's the void that has been created. We talked about the choice to recovery, the obstacles of what sponsorship can bring, of what, a recovery group could bring. And also service work, if you're doing service work, because people can hide in service work. And abandon personal recovery. That's what can happen, in short. The biggest obstacle in personal recovery is going to be the individual. Their thinking, how they're thinking. You know, I've seen right now we have a thing going on where we have more meetings. They're called secular, and people of secular they're called the free thinkers, the atheists, and the agnostics. And not in all meetings. I've sat in some good meetings on those formats. But there's some people in there, all they want to talk about is how they don't believe in God's spirit and a higher power. That's an obstacle you just set in a format. That's an obstacle to your own recovery, because how's that an active change in your thinking and your behavior? If that's all you're talking about, so you still having a problem with God. so you went to a free thinking format, you went to an atheist format, or you went to a agnostic format to talk about something you don't believe in every meeting. So, and it's really a concept. Because God is our only thing, and I said only, and I'm a very much minimized, and I know a lot of people are going to turn me off when I say this, but God is a concept, especially the way the the 12-step programs put it out. What do it say? They tell you. They say get a God of your own understanding. Get a God and get a concept on it. But what happens is most people go back to religion or some type of philosophy on it. That's what makes that an obstacle to recovery, because goddamn it, religion didn't help you when you was out there. You might as well go back to a dope man. I know some people really unfriended me behind that, but it's just how I feel. And you know what? I'm gonna say this at this time. Anytime, or you got a topic you want to talk about on this recovery from addiction platform, put it in the comments. I'll pick it up. I will pick it up, and we will roll with it, rock with it, because this is where I'm at in my recovery. Let me say this, man. I didn't get here at this point in time from 35 years, 11 months ago and some change by just keep coming. I kept coming and certain things happened. And I'm right here because I firmly believe in order to keep it, you gotta give it away. And that's what, it don't matter what format you want. All right, so an hour is coming up and I don't want to talk too long. But understand this. The biggest obstacle in anybody's recovery is going to be their thinking. It's how they think about stuff. And what people will try to use against you is your thinking. Yeah. So therefore, it has to be some principles involved to guide the thinking. All right, so I looked up concepts and I looked up principles. And it says, the question is, what is a concept? A concept is a noun. It's an abstract idea or a general notion. It's an abstract idea or a general notion. Then I looked up principle. What is a principle? A principle is a proposition or a value that is used, that is a guide for for behavior or evaluation. For behavior, so let me read that over, because I know I kind of chopped that up. When I get some help, I'm gonna get this show together. But I promise, man, y'all keep supporting me, y'all keep showing up. I'm gonna have a nice little picture out there, and I'm gonna be doing some editing and all that. But right now, I'm just sharing. So let me say this: what is a principle? A principle is a proposition or a value that is a guide for behavior or evaluation. That's what a principle is. And that's how we recover on what? We call them spiritual principles. Now, I heard people get so complex on, I was like, just understand this. Anything spiritual is energetic. A spirit is a form of energy. Everything is energy. Because it's got the electrons and the protons and the photon in it. Straight up energy. I don't care how you dissect it at the end of the day. So in spirituality, you practice what? Spiritual principles. Spiritual energy. It's real, well, it's simple to me. It's simple to me. So anyway, you got the God concept. A lot of them tell you, get a God of your own understanding, and you form that up what? Out your thinking. We form a God from our own concept. And it's how you think about it. It's how the individual think about it, or it's how a group think about it. That's one of the repercussions, in my view, and I'm going to go out there and say it, of getting the God of your own understanding. because it's your own concept. So a lot of us got guys that don't like different colored people or our concept. But if you go along spiritual lines, then you're going to be forced to you're going to have something right in front of you. You know, love is love, hate's going to be hate. Those are principles. And a lot of our principles is guided by our intentions. So going back to the topic, obstacles in recovery, I just named a few. Lack of understanding. So anyway, I'm about to sign off. Here. I want to play this little tune. I really like that beat. So anyway, in wrapping this thing up, because I got to go to bed and be responsible in the morning. That's a choice I'm going to make. All I'm saying is this. I went over a few of the major obstacles to recovery. And from recovery, and from recovery from addiction. My name is Sammy. I appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. And I also would appreciate it if you put some comments down there. Maybe you got some ideas you want to talk about it. I don't care what it is. Agnostics, atheists, the religious, the spiritual, whatever it is. Let's kick this. And I will say this. I was going to start taking phone calls. We're going to have what do you call that? The TV thing, the YouTube TV. So we're gonna be coming out on all methods of recovery because that's what I'm doing right now. A day at a time.